In 1977, a family in North London recorded something in their daughter's bedroom that would baffle experts for decades. The sounds were analyzed, dismissed, and forgotten. But in 2017, when researchers used modern audio technology to examine those old tapes, they discovered something that changed everything. What they found in those recordings shouldn't exist. And what's worse, it's still happening. This is the story of the Enfield crying room. And I need to warn you, some of what you're about to hear is going to make you question what you think you know about the world. The Hodgson family lived in a small council house on Green Street in Enfield, a working-class area in North London. Peggy Hodgson was a single mother raising 4 children: Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy. They weren't wealthy, but they were happy. The house was cramped, but filled with love and laughter. That all changed in late August of 1977. It started with furniture, not breaking or falling over, but moving. Janet's bed would shake violently in the middle of the night, waking her up in a panic. At first, Peggy thought her daughter was having nightmares or sleepwalking, but then other things started happening. Chairs would slide across the floor with no one touching them. Toys would fly off shelves. Knocking sounds would echo through the walls, always in sequences of 4 or 5, never random. Peggy was terrified, but she tried to stay rational. She checked for structural problems. She looked for signs of pipes rattling or wind getting in. She found nothing. The sounds got louder. The furniture moved more violently. And then one night in early September, something happened that made Peggy call the police. Janet was sleeping in the room she shared with her sister Margaret when the entire family was woken up by screaming. Not Janet screaming, but something else. Something that sounded almost human, but not quite right. When Peggy rushed into the room, she found Janet sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide open but unfocused, like she was asleep but somehow still awake. And the sound was coming from her, but Janet's mouth wasn't moving. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers, Carolyn Heaps and another constable, entered the house expecting to find an intruder or maybe a family dispute. What they witnessed instead was documented in an official police report that still exists in the archives today. Officer Heaps would later testify that she saw a chair move across the room by itself, sliding nearly 4 feet across the floor with no one near it. She watched it happen. The other officer saw it too. They had no explanation. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Within days, reporters started showing up. The Daily Mirror sent a photographer named Maurice, who would go on to take some of the most controversial images of the case. But more importantly, the Society for Psychical Research got involved. They sent Maurice Grosse, a paranormal investigator who had been researching unusual phenomena for years. Maurice was skeptical at first. He'd investigated dozens of supposed hauntings and found logical explanations for almost all of them. But when he arrived at the Hodgson house and spent his first night there, something changed his mind. He heard the knocking. He saw objects move. And most disturbing of all, he heard the voice. It started as whispers. Janet would be lying in bed and a voice would come out of her, deep and raspy, nothing like an 11-year-old girl could produce naturally. Maurice recorded everything. He set up audio equipment throughout the house, focusing especially on Janet's bedroom. Over the next 18 months, he would record over 200 hours of audio. The voice that came through Janet claimed to be the spirit of a man named Bill Wilkins, who had died in the house years before. Researchers confirmed that a man by that name had indeed lived in the house and died there of a brain hemorrhage in 1977, sitting in a chair in the living room. The detail that made everyone pause was this. The voice knew things about Bill Wilkins that Janet couldn't have known. But here's where things get stranger. Janet wasn't always conscious when the voice came through. Sometimes she would be in a trance-like state. Other times she would be fully asleep. Medical professionals examined her repeatedly. Doctors checked her vocal cords, her throat, her respiratory system. There was no physical way she should have been able to produce the deep, gravelly voice that came out of her. One doctor described it as sounding like someone had taken an old man's voice and forced it through a child's vocal apparatus, something that should have damaged her throat, but somehow didn't. The recordings were analyzed by voice experts in 1978. They confirmed the voice was anomalous, but couldn't explain it. The technology at the time was limited. So the tapes were filed away, and as the years went on, the Enfield case became another unsolved mystery, dismissed by skeptics as either fraud or mass hysteria.
Janet grew up. She moved away from Green Street. Peggy stayed in the house until she died in 2003, telling anyone who asked that what happened to her family was real. Then in 2017, something unexpected happened. A team of researchers at the University of London gained access to the original audio recordings. They wanted to use modern digital analysis techniques to examine the sounds, looking for evidence of fraud. What they found instead was something nobody anticipated. When they ran the audio through spectral analysis software, they discovered layers in the recordings that shouldn't exist. The voice coming from Janet wasn't just one voice, it was multiple voices, overlapping and speaking in perfect synchronization. The software detected at least 3 distinct vocal patterns happening simultaneously, all coming from the same source at the same time. This is physically impossible for a human to produce naturally. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. In the background of many recordings, beneath the obvious sounds, there was another layer. A low-frequency hum, barely audible to the human ear, but constant throughout almost every recording made in Janet's bedroom. When the researchers isolated this frequency and amplified it, they heard something that made them stop the analysis completely. It was crying. Not a child crying, but hundreds of voices, maybe thousands, all crying at once. The sound was layered so densely that it created this low rumble that had been there the entire time, just below the threshold of normal hearing. And here's what made the research team shut down their investigation. The crying wasn't on the tapes, it was in the room. They tested this by recording audio in the same bedroom in 2017, 40 years after the original events. The house had been renovated multiple times, different families had lived there, but when they recorded in Janet's old bedroom and ran the audio through the same analysis, the crying was still there. Same frequency, same density of overlapping voices. It was as if the room itself was crying, and had been crying for decades. One of the researchers, Dr. Sarah Chen, wrote in her notes that listening to the isolated frequency gave her an overwhelming sense of dread. She refused to continue working on the project. 2 other team members quit shortly after. The university quietly shelved the research.
But some of the team members talked. They shared what they found, and researchers started looking into similar cases. What they discovered was a pattern. In multiple locations around the world, in rooms where traumatic events had occurred, this same low-frequency crying could be detected. It was always in the same frequency range, always with the same layered quality, as if the same voices were crying in different locations simultaneously. There's a theory, and it's just a theory, but it suggests that certain locations can act as resonators for human suffering, that when enough pain and fear accumulates in a space, it leaves an imprint that exists outside normal time. The crying isn't a recording of something that happened. It's happening continuously, in a layer of reality that we normally can't perceive. And sometimes, in certain conditions, that layer bleeds through. Janet's bedroom might have been one of those places. The researchers found records showing that before the Hodgsons lived there, the house had a dark history. A child had died in that room in the 1950s. Before that, during the war, the house had been used as a temporary morgue during the Blitz. Dozens of bodies had been stored in what would later become Janet's bedroom. The suffering and death that had occurred in that small space might have created a thin spot, a place where the boundary between the normal world and whatever lies beneath it is weaker than it should be. Maurice Grosse recorded something else in that room, something he never shared publicly during his lifetime. In his personal notes, released after his death in 2006, he described an incident where he heard knocking outside Janet's door. He opened it, and the hallway was empty, but his recording equipment had captured something. When the 2017 research team analyzed that same recording with modern software, they were able to isolate and clarify the voices underneath the knocking. The voices were saying, "Help us." Over and over, hundreds of overlapping voices. And when they analyzed the voice patterns, they found something that shouldn't be possible. Some of the voices matched audio from other paranormal investigations, recordings made in different countries, different decades. This suggests something terrifying. If these voices are appearing in multiple locations across time, they might not be the ghosts of specific people. They might be something else entirely, something that exists in multiple places simultaneously. Janet herself has spoken about this only a few times. In a rare interview in 2015, she described how during the worst of the activity, she would sometimes feel like she was in two places at once. She'd be lying in her bed, but she'd also be somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold, where she could hear countless people crying.
There's a reason this case has never been definitively solved. The evidence is too strange, too contradictory. There are clear signs of fraud in some instances. Janet and her sister were caught faking some phenomena. Skeptics use this as proof that the entire case was a hoax. But that explanation falls apart when you look at the evidence that can't be faked. The police witnessed phenomena. Multiple investigators saw objects move. The audio recordings contain sounds that experts confirm couldn't be produced naturally. And now, with the 2017 analysis, we know there were sounds present that nobody could have been aware of in 1977. Sounds that were only revealed through modern technology. How do you fake something you don't know exists? The most unsettling possibility is that both things are true. Janet and her sister did fake some events, but that doesn't mean everything was fake. The real phenomena and the faked phenomena got mixed together, making it nearly impossible to separate truth from deception. And maybe that's exactly what whatever was in that room wanted. Confusion, doubt. Because if people are arguing about whether it's real or fake, they're not asking the more important question. What are those voices in the recording, and why are they crying? The house on Green Street still stands, but researchers who visited the house with recording equipment continue to pick up that low-frequency crying in Janet's old bedroom. It's always there, constant and unchanging. Dr. Chen, the researcher who quit the project, made a final discovery. She reversed the audio, and at one specific playback speed, one of the voices became clear. It was speaking English with a contemporary accent, and it was saying something specific. It was saying, You're listening to us now. Present tense. Not a recording from the past, but something aware of being heard in 2017. She told her colleagues that she felt like by analyzing the audio, she had made herself visible to whatever was creating them. After that, several members of the research team reported similar nightmares. The university decided to seal the audio files. The unofficial whisper among researchers is that listening to those voices might create an opening, a thin spot in your own life that they can push through. If Maurice Grosse was right, and the 2017 analysis confirms this, then the Enfield case isn't a ghost story. It's evidence of something far worse. Somewhere, in a layer of reality we can barely perceive, there might be countless people trapped in suffering, crying out for help, and the only way they can reach us is through thin spots like Janet's bedroom. And the most terrifying part is that the crying is still happening, right now, in that room and in similar rooms around the world. Because once you know those voices are there, once you understand that suffering can echo through time and space and leave a mark on reality itself, it's hard to sleep in a quiet room without wondering what you might hear if you listened carefully enough, without wondering if somewhere, just below the threshold of sound, something is crying out, and maybe, just maybe, it's crying out for you. Subscribe if you want more stories like this.